strange if you went shopping with a list of all the things you didn't want to buy. When I was a producer at the BBC, we would develop comedy ideas by looking at the opposite of what normal people would do. If you told me you didn't want a cup of coffee, what would I know about what you wanted to drink? Very little. You might want water, a cup of tea, or perhaps you'd rather go for a walk. So you'd find it absurd if I asked you to tell me more about this cup of coffee that you didn't want. Yet when I go into organisations as a consultant and people talk to me about the team's poor performance, they expect me to have conversations about how that team is performing poorly. Or if I'm coaching an executive who's indecisive, they expect me to explore and analyse his weaknesses and personality defects. Or if the team is organised into silos, they want an analysis of the cause and consequences of these silos that they don't want. All of those are examples of problem talk. And today we're going to see how we can change the world one conversation at a time by making timely switches from problem talk to solution talk. Problem talk is when you are exploring what you don't want, what's missing, deficits, barriers and gaps, what's not wanted and what's not working. Solution talk, by contrast, is what we do want, our resources, what's working, and signs of progress. Now, of course, problem talk has its place and its uses. We all like to moan and complain and have our complaints heard and even to join in. You think your operation was bad? Wait till I tell you about mine. We sometimes need to allocate blame, find a scapegoat, or decide who's going to pay the damages in a legal case. And problems, when analysed, can sometimes be the route for fixing them, in mechanics or medicine. If there's something wrong with a car engine, or if you need to fix a roof, you can identify the source of the problem and solve it. Similarly, if you have a broken leg, the way to solve that and cure it is going to be pretty much the same each time. And yet, problem talk becomes pervasive. We have a problem talk saturated society with the media looking at political problems, for example, as if talking about those problems will somehow help us to solve them. In management too, for example, a magazine like Management Today, talking about a prestigious college such as Cranfield Business School, talks about how to remove the blockages. The research concentrated on answers to the question, why, with all the facilities available, does knowledge not get transferred? Where does it go wrong? And that's probably a futile quest. Because solution talk can serve us better when we have complex issues to address involving people and changes in organisations, communities and societies. If you think about the best conversations that you've had, I imagine that they were about your resources, about your possibilities, and about seeing the world in a slightly different way. In Milwaukee, a man called William was drinking heavily. He went to see a psychiatrist and described how he would sit in his room on his sofa day after day with the radio on, drinking beer after beer. The psychiatrist analysed the cause of his problems, the roots of his difficulties with his parents' divorce and his difficult childhood, and the disappointments he'd suffered in his life, which was interesting and possibly insightful, but didn't stop the drinking. He went to see a specialist who told him that he was damaging his liver and his brain. And again, it made no difference to his drinking. He went to a third consultant, a psychotherapist, who asked him something different. He said, "How do you spend your days?" And William had to think about this, and he answered, "Drinking alcohol and listening to music." And the therapist said, what kind of music? And this led to a conversation about William's passion for music, reminded him that he played the guitar and had a band that he wanted to get back on the road. So William set off with this renewed ambition, got his band going again, and learnt how to control his drinking. This third therapist was called Steve DeShazer, and with his wife and partner Insu Kimberg and other colleagues in Milwaukee, they founded and practiced solution-focused brief therapy, taking on the most difficult cases and having conversations about what people wanted, what worked for them, and encouraging them to do more of that. I studied with Steve and Insu, and I learned that over many years of clinical trials and controlled studies, that their therapy got as good or better results than any other therapy, and what's more, did so in shorter time, deserved the title brief, and with less stress and burnout for the therapists who enjoyed these conversations about resources and possibilities. And I wanted to put this work into practice because it seemed to me an idea worth spreading. But I'm not a psychotherapist, and luckily you don't need to be. I found that you could use these ideas in everyday conversations, in organisations, in coaching, and in my writing, and as co-founder of Soul World, an organisation that has developed over the last 10 years into a network of more than 1,000 practitioners who use these ideas in organisations around the globe. This led me to meet Hans Zeinhofer in Austria, who I interviewed at a conference. Hans is the managing director of a large power utility in Austria. And one day his company sent out a message to all of their customers announcing mistakenly a large increase in electricity prices. This caused a lot of chaos and disruption. The phones were overcome with calls and people were threatening to change their electricity suppliers. So Hans and his team dealt with this crisis, and after a couple of days they'd done what they needed to do. And it was Hans who had to call the meeting that any of you who've worked in organisations will be familiar with, the inquest. And you can imagine how little people were looking forward to this occasion. And they came in, and Hans said, "You may think I'm crazy, but I'd like you to answer this question. What did we do well?" he wrote on the board. What worked? And he assured them that he was serious. They came up with some thoughts that they'd managed to answer all the calls, that the senior team had come up and helped on the telephones. And of course you might expect that asked that question they would come up with one or two things. 40 minutes later, they had a very long list of all the things that had worked well. And Hans was able to ask the second question, what else do we need to do? And they knew what they needed to do to avoid having such crises occur in the future, and how, if they were to occur, they'd be able to deal with them. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote, "We learn by rearranging what we know." And with a clear-sighted and courageous leader like Hans, it was possible for this team to see what they knew about dealing with crises and creating a collaborative and constructive culture in which people would work together to deal with the issues that they needed to deal with. But what if you have persistent underperformance? What if your organisation has people like Bob? Most organisations have a few people like Bob. If you have teenage children, you may know someone like Bob. Bob worked at the craft factory in Sweden, and his job involved looking after the machine that date-stamped the processed cheese as it came down the production line. And Bob was not terribly good at his job. Sometimes the machine would go wrong, and it would run off item after item of wrongly date-stamped cheese, which the company couldn't use. He'd be very slow to stop this machine. The managers have tried all sorts of things to stop these losses and to deal with this irritating lack of discipline. They put up signs saying, "Please look after the machines properly." They took it up with Bob at his appraisal interview, but he didn't seem terribly interested. it would have been expensive and difficult to sack him or replace him because the unions were strong and the cost of new recruitment would be large. As it happened, the managers in this company were learning solution-focused coaching and wanted to try solution talk. So Bob's manager thought he'd put aside the problem talk he was used to and give it a go. And next time the machine went wrong, he watched patiently whilst Bob let the cheese run on and on and on, until eventually Bob pressed the button and stopped the machine. The manager went up to him and said, "Thank you. If you'd let that go on any longer, we'd have lost even more money. Well done." And Bob looked a bit surprised because he'd not been treated this way before. And next time the machine ran on, he stopped it a little bit faster. The manager went to him again, thanked him again, and said, "Bob, how did you know to stop the machine then?" And Bob said, "Oh, it starts to sound a little bit different in the engine when this is happening." And within a week, Bob had become an expert on that machine and was meticulously stopping it at the first sign of trouble. And this coaching approach was spreading conversation at a time through the factory. And in a controlled study, this factory outperformed an identical sister plant across the border in Finland, where they weren't using these solution talk ideas. So I guess you've got some conversations coming up yourselves that are going to matter and could make a difference, where you have this choice between problem talk and solution talk. The philosopher William James, father of modern psychology, said, "The art of being wise is the art of knowing what to overlook." And this means that there will be problems, but we can choose where to put our attention, on the drinking or on the music. And we can choose where to put our attention in our forthcoming conversations. Sometimes problem talk has its place. For example, if you get a flat tyre, you don't want the mechanic in the garage to ask you about a time when your tyre was working well. But if you see the opportunity for solution talk, here are 3 tips. First of all, look for what's wanted. So if someone's complaining about something, you can sympathise with them and ask them, "So I guess you don't want that?" To which they'll probably say, "No." And you can go on with, "Well, what would you want instead?" Second tip, identify what's working. Someone comes to you and things perhaps haven't gone exactly to plan. You can ask them, "Well, what went well?" Even a little bit. And thirdly, what's next? If someone's about to embark on a challenging or difficult project, ask them how will they know that it's on track? What will help them to see that it's going well or making progress? So these are the 3 tips. What's wanted, what's working, what's next. And of course, what kind of music?